Alright, so in this lesson we're going to learn about scientific inquiry and scientific methods. This will be episode 1, and we're going to concentrate on forming a scientific hypothesis. For your instructions, you're going to be using Cornell-style notes. My suggestion always is to make your line go down the middle, but it's your choice. If you are not familiar with or cannot recall or need a refresher on setting up Cornell-style notes, there is a video on the Blackboard course. So what do you need to make sure you learn in this set of notes? We're going to be concentrating on finding out how scientists go about coming up with ideas to perform scientific investigations. So here's what you should learn by the end of these notes. You should be able to make a workable definition for what science is. We're going to review the 3 branches of science. Learn about scientific method and specifically scientific inquiry. Define the steps used to make a scientific hypothesis, and then follow an example of how to make one of those. So we're going to start with what is science. Your textbook says science is the investigation and exploration of natural events and of the new information that results from those investigations. It's a decent definition. Here's one that I prefer. Science is an objective, self-correcting method for gathering and organizing information about the natural world through repeated observation and experimentation. You can choose which one you wish to record, or remember, you can combine these two. You could look it up if you'd like to, but the idea is to come up with a definition that kind of makes sense to you, not just copying what's from the book. So again, there's 3 branches of science. In 6th grade, you should have learned earth science. If not, hopefully you'll get another chance in high school to take that course. There's also life science, which is typically the 7th grade curriculum. And then right now you are in physical science, which is the study of matter, energy, and physics and chemistry. So scientific inquiry is specific to the scientific method. Its definition right there, process that uses a set of skills to answer questions or to test ideas about the natural world. Beginning scientific inquiry steps. So when you begin scientific inquiry, the scientific method, you take a few basic steps. Not always in this order, but generally this is the order. So you might make an observation, you might see something, hear something, smell something, whatever, and be like, oh, well, what's that all about? So you ask a question, why or how come or what if, that kind of thing. And then the research, and this can be just research like you looking in your memory and going, the last time I was here in Winn-Dixie, I smelled bread baking, and today I smell something sweeter baking, or whatever it is. It can be formal, you can go online, you can go to a library, whatever kind of research you need to become more informed about the topic. Somewhere in there you're going to make an inference. Now an inference is one of those terms that I find most students have difficulty with. They may have never heard it, or they may have used it but been like, not quite sure what that means. If you think back to when you were in elementary school and you were first learning about the scientific method and the teachers taught you what a hypothesis was, they often use educated guess. That's because at that point in your education, that's kind of the easiest thing for you to understand and go with. You've since learned that educated guess is really not a good definition for a hypothesis, although there is some guessing involved. The educated guess is more like the inference. So it's like, this is caused by, maybe it's caused by this, and you do a logical explanation of it based on your research and all that kind of stuff. And your inference plays a key role in developing your hypothesis. So when you're developing a scientific question, you've got your observation done, you probably got your questioning done, your research is complete as it can be, and you've kind of come up with an idea through an inference. So now you have to make sure your question is testable. In science, questions have to be testable. If they're not testable, it's more like just making a claim or an opinion. So a testable question formally is one that can be answered by designing and conducting an experiment. They have specific formats. You can choose which ones you like. You can change them based on whichever format best fits what you're doing. So one of them is, does changing blank affect blank? How does changing blank affect blank? Or what is the effect of blank on blank? And you can do variations of these as well. All right, so when you're getting ready to do your investigation, we all know that you have to come up with a hypothesis, based on your testable question and your inference. So the official definition is a possible explanation for an observation that you can test scientifically. There's a bunch of different formats for hypotheses, and I've come across a lot of debate with this, but the one we're going to settle on is pretty simple, I think. It's if I do something, you're going to fill in the I do something, then something will happen. And in this case, the first blank you're filling in, that's your independent variable or your test variable, and the second blank is your outcome variable or your dependent variable. All right, so let's go through an example of how to write a hypothesis using the scientific method. We're going to use for our question, why do frogs make croaking noises right before it rains? It's been kind of rainy recently, and sometimes I like to sit outside on the porch and kind of watch the rain as it comes through. And I've noticed that right before the rain, the frogs begin croaking. They kind of hang out in my gutters at my house, and it echoes really loudly, so I can definitely hear, and there'll be tons of them croaking. So right before it rains, why do they croak so much? So the first thing I'm going to do is come up with a testable question, because that's really way too broad. And I'm going to think about the weather conditions right before it rains. So I know it gets like darker outside, the clouds increase, the darkness of the clouds, they go from being white and fluffy to kind of brownish and gray and sometimes black. The temperature can fall or rise, and that can be because of the wind, and the wind could increase or it could decrease. And then you've got a humidity change, and I'm going to focus on the change in humidity because frogs are amphibious, and I know they do breathe air, but they also breathe through their skin by taking the oxygen molecule out of moisture. It's H2O, and the O in there is for oxygen, so they get it through their skin. So maybe for their survivability, they've learned to know, hey, it's going to rain, we can go swimming again, we can get some air, we can have a little frog party, whatever we're going to do. All right, so my testable question, I'm going to focus in on the humidity. Not really good at question marks. So how does a change in humidity affect frogs croaking? Not frogs dying, just frogs making the sound of croaking. And this is testable. I can measure changes in humidity. The hypothesis, you put the if I do something, then something changes. I could set up a lab where I purposefully change the humidity inside like an aquarium or something and measure the amount of croaking through observation and recordings. So now I'm ready for my hypothesis. I taught myself some shortcuts because I took a lot of notes in my lifetime, and I taught myself that in capital H with a circle around it stands for hypothesis, so I don't have to write that big word out. So my hypothesis is going to be changing humidity. So if the humidity increases, then the frogs will croak more. So the end is near. This is the end of this episode. In this episode, you should have learned, you should have gotten a workable definition for what science was. We reviewed the 3 branches of science. You learned a little bit about the scientific method and scientific inquiry. We defined the steps used to make a hypothesis in science. And then we followed an example of how to make a scientific hypothesis. All right, hope to see you next time. Have a good day.